Hello everyone, Tech Haberdashery back again, and I'm going to do another bit of a little bit of a different video. I'm going to do my thoughts on the recent Apple event. That was the Apple event on October 30th in Brooklyn. Just to kind of lead into it here, I know I do a lot of Android review videos, I do stuff with Linux. It's because I like technology in general, but let it be no secret that I am an Apple fanboy. I've admitted to being such in prior videos, but I wanted to state my Apple fanboy credentials up front. I worked for the company for 2.5 years as an iOS Tier 2 and Mac support technician. I'm formerly an Apple certified Macintosh technician. I'm also currently a shareholder, and like I said, just in general, an unashamed Apple fanboy. Like, I'm one of those guys. I mean, I like technology all around, so I like Apple stuff, and I like all stuff that other companies do as well, so... But I wanted to give my thoughts on the October 30th event because it left me kind of in a state of it being lukewarm. Generally speaking, I love what Apple does, but there are specific instances where the general does not apply. So I wanted to go through some of that and just kind of give my thoughts on the new MacBook Air, the Mac Mini, and the iPad Pro. I will first start off with the MacBook Air. First, this was the product that I was kind of in the middle of the road about when it came to caring about what the day's announcements were going to be. I love the Mac. I likely always will. Behind the Mac Mini, this is kind of a matter of just kind of meh interest. I don't have any particular love for the MacBook Air. I've never particularly cared for it in general. I've always thought it should be the MacBook and the MacBook Pro, but that's also when I started getting into Apple, was in 2008 with my very first MacBook. So it's kind of a nostalgic love for things of the past in some cases. So I wasn't really sure that the MacBook Air's refresh was needed. I mean, there's a lot of people who said it was. I was thinking that if they just upgraded the MacBook, that would be good enough, and we didn't really need the Air. Apple has decided differently, and that's fine. Second, I want to say, since they did finally update the MacBook Air, it is about time it got a Retina display. Don't get me wrong, a 1440 by 900 screen doesn't look terrible on 13 inches, but when it's compared to the Retina on a MacBook Pro, there's a lot to be desired. Is it $200 worth of desirable? Well, that's ultimately on you to decide if 4 times the resolution is worth it. Now, the T2 coprocessor, which handles storage encryption, an absolute must in my book since I focus on security more than anything, first and foremost. The storage encryption, it controls audio, it handles the video for FaceTime. I think that the secure enclave feature that the T2 is going to provide, along with the other security options like encrypting your storage, which is another absolute must, is absolutely vital in this day and age. We know how dangerous it is on the internet. We know that there's a great number of hackers out there who are looking for opportune moments to exploit a system's weaknesses. We know that there's state-level hacking going on, and unfortunately that includes the U.S. government. We've known all about that for years now. I don't really guess I have anything bad to say about it. So like I said, it might be worth the $200 additional cost above the $999 entry-level MacBook Air. Now, I know, I'm one of the 6 people in the world that likes the butterfly keyboards. Yes, they've had problems, but they do feel good, so I'm giving this a bonus, in my opinion. I think this is a good upgrade for the MacBook Air to have, is the butterfly keyboard. So, good job, Apple. Thank you for bringing that to the MacBook Air. The next thing I'm kind of meh about with the MacBook Air is the audio, like improved audio. Yay, great, fantastic. I have crap hearing anyway, so it doesn't really matter that much to me. I'm sure that there's people out there who will notice a difference, but I also believe that audiophiles are not going to be buying a MacBook Air for its audio reproductive ability. As far as the CPU goes, we now have another hyper-threaded dual-core part from Intel. Who would have guessed? Who? It's almost unbelievable that we have another one of those in an ultralight laptop, an ultralight Mac on top of that. At least it's not a Core M or whatever that terrible thing Apple has inside of the MacBook is. it's a decent CPU for the class of system, impressive turbo boost ability, but how long is a turbo boost really going to last when the need kicks in? It's not going to turbo boost all the way up and stay there for any given amount of time. If it did, it's going to kill the battery a little bit more quickly. So, I don't know. I just don't get excited about mid-range CPUs anymore. So, and it says it's got Intel's UHD graphics 617 instead of the 615, which is, God only knows, but probably something like a 100 megahertz boost at most. So that'll make effectively 0% difference if you were going to do any kind of gaming on the system, which I highly doubt anybody would. Not any kind of serious gaming, at least. I mean, lower end stuff, 2D games, probably all that would probably work just fine, to be honest with you. But anything else, I would say not likely. I mean, maybe it's going to help with rendering tasks if you're doing some light video editing, but this thing is not a creative professional's laptop. I mean, take it around with you, get some work done, certainly, but I don't think it's going to be anybody's full-time workstation. The MacBook Air now has a super fast solid-state drive. Not that the prior model didn't have a pretty quick solid-state drive already, but now it goes up to 1.5 terabytes. Hey, guys, that's great. I'm always happy to have more storage. This is also something that's probably going to make 0% difference for most people because this is not the creative professional's workstation. I mean, maybe audio production to some degree, maybe, but you're not going to be dealing with massive 4K video files on this thing. Not unless you want to be rendering for hours and hours and hours on end. I mean, there's some people that would, I suppose, but I just don't think that given the CPU and the RAM limitations of this machine that it's really the creative professional system, so I don't know why you would need a solid-state drive that's going to be 1.5 terabytes on this workstation. Add to that the outrageous price of this solid-state drive. It's like $1,200. Like $1,200 for a terabyte and a half. Man, I can't. I'm not sure I understand the pricing scheme behind that, is all I'm saying. I'm not upset that you have that option. If you have that option, and that's what you want, there's build-to-order features on Apple.com for a reason. Build you a MacBook Air with a 1.5 terabyte drive and double the price of the laptop for some reason, I guess. But hey, that's on you. If that's the way you want to spend your money, far be it for me to judge. And lastly, we come down to connectivity. Oh, I do lament the loss of the MagSafe adapter. I genuinely feel like it was the best power cable ever made of all time, but again, that may be simply me desperate for nostalgia. But what are you going to do? I've heard a lot of people say over the years that their cords have frayed. I haven't seen that personally too much, but at the same time, I only worked in one small region of the southeast U.S. I have not been in a position to gather nationwide statistics like Apple has. So maybe those cords fray so much that Apple just said, we're replacing them so often anyway, there's no point in even having the MagSafe because people aren't ripping them out the side of their computers, but they're still having the power cords replaced on a regular basis. So who knows on that side. We get two USB-C ports, which are Thunderbolt as well, and hooray for that. Can you say eGPU gaming at last? I have an eGPU box, actually, so maybe something to consider in the future if I ever get an extra $1,200 to burn. Not today, that's for sure. But if I have to be honest, where I'm most underwhelmed and let down by this MacBook Air is the cost, and more depressingly, the upgrade costs, which I've already talked about the price of upgrading the solid-state drive to its maximum capacity. Me, personally, I think that Apple needs to do away with the $999 model, put this in its spot, and give it 256 gigabytes of solid-state on the storage, and I genuinely think you've got the best $1,000 laptop that you could hope to get that runs Mac OS. And, again, Apple fanboy, I think Mac OS is the best OS, although Linux is pretty solid as well. I mean, I only use Windows for gaming at this point, so to me, Windows is a toy. even though I work in the enterprise, so obviously Windows is not a toy. Anyway, sorry, that's a tangent. You get what I'm saying. I don't think that this laptop really hits the sweet spot, but I'm also not a financial strategist at Apple. To illustrate my point a little bit with the increased storage capacity, I'm going to tell a small anecdotal story. A couple months back now, at the tail end of July, I believe it was, my girlfriend's mother bought a MacBook Air. It was the prior model MacBook Air, obviously the one before the Retina, and she got the model which had 128 gigabytes of storage in it. She's coming from a 2010 15-inch MacBook Pro that had a 320 gigabyte hard drive. Now, she did not have, given how old that computer is, she did not have a lot of pictures and videos on the computer. But she did have enough so that it became a problem when she went to restore it from our Time Machine backup. She didn't have enough space on her drive to accommodate all of her pictures and her videos. That's not a good experience straight out the box with the first Mac you've bought in 8 years. If we had the 256 gigabyte option, it wouldn't have been an issue. Now, ultimately, she had the money, so she went back, returned that one, got the upgraded version. It was no big deal for her in the end. And that's fine, and Apple's happy to see that. Obviously, Apple's not going to gripe about having somebody, come and upgrade, basically by turning in the old one and getting a new one. But still, it was frustrating for me because I'm the guy setting it up for her, and it's kind of like, well, why is it like that? I don't know. I'm not, everybody looks at me in the family because I'm the Apple guy, of course. So I have to be expected to answer these things. And so I just had to kind of chalk it up and say, marketing and strategy, I guess. I don't know. I'm not with the company anymore. I haven't been for 4 years. So sorry about that. But you understand the point I'm trying to make, I think, which is it's a bad first experience with a new machine. The storage limitation is probably more than anything my biggest gripe. I know Apple wants, perhaps even needs, to push the iCloud storage as a good long-term perpetual cash flow. However, this is ultimately a winning strategy for Apple. Being that the entry-level laptop is $1,000, getting the 256 gigabyte storage upgrade will put you at $1,199, the same cost as the very least expensive Retina MacBook Air. Then, to upgrade that to 256 gigabytes of storage will be another $200. So you may ultimately end up paying $400 more for the MacBook Air than what you had come in originally supposing. So you see the entry-level MacBook Air for $1,000, you decide you need more storage, you pay $200 more. At that point, you've already convinced yourself that $1,200 is fine. So you look at the Retina MacBook Air and you go, well, I still need that extra $200 storage. Maybe I do just go ahead and pay another $200 on top of that to upgrade this one as well. So now you've got the newest MacBook Air with the Retina display, which is a fantastic display. If you haven't had the chance to go look at one yet, please do. I know they're not on the store shelves yet, but if you've seen the Retina display on the MacBook Pros, you'll have a good idea of what the new MacBook Air is going to look like. So there's that. It's a winning strategy for Apple. I think people have proven that they are willing to go and pay the upgrade costs. We'll talk about the Apple tax later. But like I said, I think it's a winning strategy for Apple. I'm lukewarm about it. I don't think it was the best deal, but I'm also the guy who wants to see Apple, smashing the other competitors in terms of sales. But again, we're looking at Apple's sales of the Macs are doing better than other manufacturers' sales of their computers. So maybe I don't have any room to talk, really. Like I said, I was never a senior person at Apple. I never handled any of the finances, so I don't know. This is pure speculation on my part. And like I said, aside from being a shareholder, I don't have anything to do with the company anymore since I've been, we parted ways 4 years ago. The last part of this, and I would be remiss if I did not bring it up, is the politics game and the economics of using recycled aluminum. Environmentally speaking, we have to give Apple credit of using recycled materials. 100% recycled aluminum tin, I believe is what they said. And that's a great thing. So this is all stuff that has been used before. Apple's going through the refining process, melting it back down, turning it into new materials to be reused. That's great for Apple. That's also great for the environment. I think that a potential problem with this could be that you are refining these materials that have already been used is going to be more expensive than just using new ones. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of the recycling industry, so I cannot say that that is definitively a factor. What may be a factor is the US-China trade war that's going on right now with the tariffs. Steel, tin, and aluminum were the three things that were first tariffed by the US on China. So if the US, or if Apple rather, is using the US to refine these used aluminum and tin, then you're going to be paying higher labor costs because we're much more expensive here in the US than anywhere in Asia. And if not, if you're getting it from Asia, then you're paying the tariff prices to import these materials into the US. I want to be clear about this, I'm not getting into the political game. I'm not saying whether the tariffs are a good idea or a bad idea. I'm just speculating as to one of the reasons why we may be looking at a higher cost Retina MacBook Air. I know that first segment was long and wordy, and I wanted to make my points as clearly as I could. I hope I did that. Obviously, if you have questions, ask them in the comments. We'll talk about it. And I know that it also makes me sound like I hate the MacBook Air, but I don't. I'm just lukewarm about it. I think it's good. I just don't know that it's $1,200 good. And I think that's what I'm ultimately struggling with. It's got a lot of good points. Keyboard, T2 processor, Retina display, all good things. Not good things. 256 or 128 gigabytes of RAM but storage, 128 gigabytes solid state drive that you can't upgrade. So what you buy is what you get. I just don't know that it's $1,200 good. So that's not even really, and I'm not even comparing it to, I'm comparing it more to the prior generation MacBook Air, but this is not even talking about the MacBook line of laptops, which is another fat bag of what the hell is going on with this. So it just, the MacBook Air is just in a confusing spot. It's not bad, it's not great, it's just confusing. Alright, so let's move on. Let's talk about the iPad Pro, which is easily the star of the show. I know the Mac Mini came next in the presentation, but I'm saving the Mac Mini for last because the Mac Mini was the thing that I was most excited about, and we're going to discuss all about the Mac Mini. There's a lot to say about it that I don't think that most people are picking up on. But we will, hopefully. Hopefully I've got it right, but we'll discuss in a second. So we're going to talk about the iPad Pro first, and I have no real love for the iPad Pro. I don't think it's a bad device. There's a lot of people who love it. I think it's good for what it is. I mean, goodness, I still have my iPad from 2013. Yeah, I'm a total nerd there. And yes, it is my first iPad. And it is my only iPad that I've had in 5 years, almost 5 years old. This is the original iPad Air. For what it is, it's good. But for what it is, it's just a glorified magazine reader. I read news articles and I read some books and some comic books on it, and once in a very odd blue moon, if I am desiring a larger screen, I will open up Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes and play that, but the performance is kind of laggy now, 5 years in, so, do what you can. So I didn't have a whole lot of excitement around the iPad Pro, but after seeing this presentation, mine's changed a little bit. Okay, first, let's talk about the size. Yeah, that's what she said. I know. Let's talk about that. I'm somebody, I have exceptionally good eyesight, so I'm plenty happy with the 11-inch iPad Pro. I don't think that an extra 1.9 inches of screen is worth another $200. I mean, the iPad Pro baselining is $799, and I think that's a fantastic price point. $999 for a 13-inch screen, I don't think it's worth it. I don't think that you'd have enough of a productivity difference to make that worth it unless you had, some considerations for the visual. So while I mentioned earlier I have terrible hearing, I have stellar eyesight. So I'm happy with the 11-inch. Actually, I think that my iPad Air's screen, which I believe is 10.5 inches. No, this is 9.7. 9.7 inches is great. And so 11 inches, perfect, right on the money. Happy to have it. It's also like the size of the 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper now. I mean, like nearly identical. I think that's your winner. I think if you're going to get an iPad Pro, I think the $799 is the way to go. It's a great, great size. The cameras, they're really excellent. It looks like they're on par with the new iPhone XR cameras, but they don't have the optical image stabilization I learned after the fact. So I almost didn't know that before I made this video. I actually just learned about that just a few minutes before I started recording here. So it's going to have a great high quality camera. Obviously the front facing camera, it's got the camera array, so it can do Face ID and it can unlock from any position that you have it, whether it's portrait or landscape. Gosh, too many P words there. lost my train of thought for a second. So I think the front facing camera is going to be great. I think the rear facing camera is going to be great. So great cameras on the iPad Pro. By all accounts, the cameras on the iPhone XS Max and XR are fantastic as well. I actually played with the iPhone XR cameras this past weekend at the Apple Store. They are genuinely impressive, and it's better than people give it credit for. I mean, I say that. It's better than you can see on YouTube, I'm pretty sure. If you saw it in person, you would be genuinely impressed by what you got out of it. And for the iPad Pro, there is the glorious, and I do see glorious, there's a glorious USB-C port. Hallelujah, amen. And it is an iPad Pro, so as the name implies, it is aimed at the professional market. So in the professional market, USB-C is a plus. I think this applies across the board to hospitals. I think it's true for local and state government. Any kind of major enterprise deployment, that includes me, because I'm with the U.S. federal government. I do IT work for them as a contractor sometimes. So I think that I think it's just about damn time. I mean, the Lightning thing is just not working out for Apple in the professional space, and you basically have the mass of the market pushing against Apple, and Apple had to give in this one time. And I think it's a great choice. I think USB-C is a superior technology. Lightning is cool, it does a lot of awesome things, but Lightning is still only USB 2. You've got to update it. Apple updated it. Thank you, Apple. Moving on. There's potential with USB-C. There's the potential that you're looking at any number of peripherals that you could connect to this thing. I mean, it's we're talking about storage, we're talking about maybe card readers, we're talking about stuff that I don't even know about. I'm not a creative professional, I'm an enterprise professional, but I'm sure that there's super advanced microphones or perhaps external lighting or camera arrays that you can connect to the iPad Pro. Like I said, stuff that I'm not in a position to really talk about. There's also the potential of maybe even hooking up something like a PKI card reader, like with the enterprise workstations we have. There's card readers that have a little an encryption chip on them. You put them in, you type in a PIN number so you can log into your computer. So that way you don't have to remember a 38-character password. So that would be awesome if you could do that with the iPad Pro. I don't know how useful that would be since, biometrics, but the trick there is that you're going to have to set up biometrics on each individual iPad. If you needed to log into a secure website that used some kind of PKI authentication, then you need to have something like Active Directory to authenticate you when you log into the websites, which would necessitate a PKI card reader, which you can do with USB-C. Hallelujah. I don't know if it's ever going to be a reality for me, but it's a cool idea to think about. So when they started talking about the CPU and GPU combo in this particular system, it really got me thinking about the potential raw horsepower of the iPad Pro. And I got myself thinking, I wonder if I could get rid of my Mac Mini as my primary computer and use an iPad Pro. The real question in my mind is not whether the computational power is enough. It's, I wonder if you could connect multiple peripherals through a USB hub. So if you have external hard drives, and then maybe, a Wacom tablet, or who knows what, you could have an output to an external monitor. If you could run all that through a hub, and then connect that hub to the Lightning or the USB-C cable on the iPad, could you have effectively a legitimate computer replacement? I mean, A lot of people were very lukewarm on the "what's a computer" ad campaign that Apple did. So there's no real way of knowing if people will flock to that idea until it's tried. And there's no real way of knowing if it's going to work until we get our hands on the iPad Pro. I would like to. I think that it's got the raw computational ability to make it happen. Whether or not Apple will allow multiple USB devices to be connected at once is going to be a whole other story, and we will have to see what the future holds. But there is a lot of potential, there's a lot of opportunity here to really move people away from the Mac and towards iOS, if that's what Apple wants. I don't know that that's what Apple wants, but iOS is definitely their biggest install base. People have more iOS devices than they do Macs. That's hands down true. And given the numbers that Apple showed on screen about how many portable computers they have, or I think it was portable computers, it was iPad sales compared to other manufacturers' portable computers. So, which is a low-key swipe at Huawei there. I think if you saw, they had like 0.4 million of their portable computers sold compared to like 40-something million. I want to say like 45-ish million iPad Pros. I'd have to go look at the number again. I'm sorry. But the significant disparity, to say the least. HP, Dell, and Lenovo don't even stack up to the number of iPad sales alone. I think it was iPad Pro sales. I don't even think it was all iPads. I'd have to double-check that to be sure. But you get the idea. Apple does really well with the iPad Pros. I think that that's going to be I think it's really going to be the device to get, and with this current one, it could very much be a legitimate computer replacement. And USB-C has a lot to do that. Okay, so let's discuss the CPU and the GPU. Mentioned that it's got a lot of power. And a lot of power it does have. It's got 8 CPU cores, 4 high performance, 4 efficiency cores, and 7 GPU cores. That is a lot of processing power, especially with the power that Apple has more and more been unlocking with the ARM licensing that they've done, the ARM-based CPUs. If you were to get all 8 of them running at once, you could really, really knock it out of the box. I mean, there's been early preliminary tests showing the A12, not even the A12 Bionics, which the iPad Pro has, but the A12 that's in the iPhone XS and XR, and it's really, in terms of synthetic benchmarks at least, it's really no comparison at all. I mean, this thing could really be a better computer for you than the MacBook Air could, so long as you're willing to sacrifice a touchpad and keyboard. And even then, you can get like a keyboard folio and put the iPad in it, so you'd still have a physical keyboard to type on. But I mean, you're talking about real, legitimate 4K editing. I think that it was a great idea for Apple to bring out Adobe and show us a full Photoshop suite that can then even take those photos and put them into an AR mode. Like, great move, Apple. Right on the money. You could even, with this kind of CPU, or these graphics processors that's in this CPU, rather, you could even play Civ 6. So, I mean, like, you could play it really well. I mean, it was already, playable on the current generation iPad and the prior model iPad Pro. It plays very smoothly on that. By all accounts, it plays very well on the new iPhones. It would play even better on the iPad Pro. I mean, it's not 4K gaming, but it's going to be damn good. I mean, it'll be better performance you get out of Civ 6 than you do on Linux, because apparently Firaxis hates Linux. So, sorry. But, I mean, music editing, video editing, getting office work done, all of these things are possible now with this new system, and while they've been Photoshop, competitors, I think that having legit Photoshop, the full thing, on the iPad Pro is a clear presentation of what exactly this machine is capable of, and so we have to give Apple props on that, and I'm excited for the future. Intel needs to be paying attention. They really need to be paying attention to this. I think that there is, down the road, there's some serious potential for ARM processors to become the mainstay of mobile devices, and mobile devices may very well become, you might even make the argument they already are, may become the mainstay computer of the average household. Apple's got their own custom silicone, Huawei's got their own custom silicone, and Samsung's got their own custom silicone. We don't really see too much in the way of Samsung CPUs here in the US due to some sort of legal issue or other. I don't know. I haven't really dug into that issue. I know of it sparingly. Something between Samsung and ARM, or Qualcomm rather, but that's not, we're not talking about Samsung. So if Photoshop and other professional apps have the power they need to run smoothly, then you know that means games are going to run well. They showed off NBA 2K Mobile, and it looks good. It easily is equal to some console games. That's a caveat to stress, some console games. I am not talking about PC gaming here. I'm talking about console games. Apple has reportedly likened this thing to an Xbox One S, not an X, but an S like Sigma, which I can believe. Given how many pixels are on the screen that this thing is driving, I'm convinced. I think it's absolutely possible that these 7 GPU cores are keeping up with an Xbox One S. I mean, the resolution on the iPad Pro, the 11-inch version, is sharp enough to cut your finger on just about. I mean, I remember playing the original TIE Fighter back when I was a kid on PC and thinking, man, these graphics are great. And that was like 640 by 320 or something like that, or 640 by 480. Man, it was back in the day. Gosh, I know. I'm like showing I'm an old man, but I mean, the old school TIE Fighter and the old school StarCraft games were impressive, and now you've got these kind of high quality Civ 6 and NBA 2K Mobile. And I'm sure they're going to bring out some outstanding first person shooters that are on this display that's, ballparking. It's not really like 2K, but it's like half 4K. I think it's a little more than half 4K. Not really 16 by 9 though, but really high resolution. Definitely better than 1440 by 900. Definitely better than 1080p resolution. Again, not really 16 by 9, but close. Anyway, I just think about the processing power this thing's got in it, and I genuinely think that it's going to leave. It's going to be impressive once you get your hands on it and you can play some high quality games. But let's be realistic for a moment. You can only bend physics so far. Apple has undeniably designed a chip that will help things help with, any game that's programmed in something like Metal 2. And they're going to squeeze every single ounce of visual pop from these CPUs and these GPUs. But you can only bend physics so far. You aren't going to get PC or Xbox One X level of graphics on a chip that peaks at pulling something along the lines of 15, 20, maybe 25 watts. And this is an assumption I'm making based off of what I have found by the user WinterCharm on Reddit. The Xbox One X has a peak power draw of 172 watts, which is 116 watts above the system's idle state based on AnandTech's findings. I will have links to both of these below. Most of that power draw is undoubtedly the CPU and the GPU combo in the Xbox One X. So there's a world of difference in just the sheer amount of power that is available to a full-size modern computer or gaming console as compared to the iPad Pro. The iPad Pro is going to be impressive. It's going to game better than any other iPad has ever gamed. It's going to game better than a lot of Macs are going to game. But it is not going to be the standard that we're going to hold the gaming sphere up to. It's not going to compete with PC gaming long term. I mean, it might have an edge now in many areas, ease of access being a thing. I think that getting set up with an iPad and getting some games installed is easier than getting set up with a PC, installing Steam or Origin, and then playing one of those games. I mean, you could, I suppose with a PC, you can log in and download from stuff, some games from the Windows Store, I guess it would be, in that regard, it'd be relatively easy. But you're not looking at, when really, let's be honest, when we're talking about PC gaming, we're talking about Steam. Nobody goes, oh man, the best games are on the Windows Store. They're not. They're on Steam, and you know that, and I know that, and everybody knows that. So you're going to get a great experience gaming-wise on the iPad Pro, but it's not going to be 4K PC gaming. It's not even going to be Xbox One X gaming. It just can't push 4,000 pixels. It's not going to be 4K. Sorry. I mean, it's going to not 4,000 pixels. You know what I mean? It's not going to be 4K resolution. So what I'm saying is that the iPad Pro is going to have some great gaming chops for what it is in the mobile space. It's not going to be 4K gaming on a PC or the Xbox One X, which isn't really true 4K gaming from what I understand. They do sub-pixel or resolution scaling, I believe. Was it checkerboarding? I think that's the term that they use. But for a mobile device, it's going to be the way to go. Do not misunderstand the point I am making here. This is an utter and absolute win for Apple's engineers. There is a major power disparity between the iPad Pro and most x86 computer systems. So continuing on with the iPad Pro, let's talk about storage. I'm mildly disappointed that it only has 64 gigabytes of storage, which is the same as the prior model. But I'm happy that it's double that of the standard iPad model. Genuinely, I think 64 gigabytes is the bare bones that any iOS device needs, especially with the incredibly high quality camera that are in these things now. So your storage is going to fill up quick. I think that 64 gigabytes is the bare minimum. I would like to see 128, but we know how much that upgrade costs, so you pick for yourself. Actually, I think in the iPad Pro, they don't even offer a 128 option. They offer 256 for $200, if I'm not mistaken, I believe. I'll put a picture up, and if not, then you can see what it is on the screen, so don't listen to my words right now. And lastly, we'll talk about the Apple Pencil. The Apple Pencil is also something I'm a bit lukewarm about. It's $129 for the model amount announced with this iPad Pro, except it doesn't come with the iPad Pro. So if the Pencil is something you're interested in enough to buy, add that to the top of the base cost of the $799 iPad Pro price tag. The Pencil does look fantastic. It's got a lot of cool little features in it. It could be very versatile. I think it has a better shape. I like the actual kind of octagon, actual pencil-like shape that it has, as opposed to the original Pencil's perfectly smooth shape myself. But that is because I used to draw a lot with the old school number 2 pencils back when I was in school. So I think it's a better shape. I think it's got a lot of great features. I don't know if it's $129 good, but you don't have a choice because the original Pencil only works, it seems, according to Apple's website, only works with the prior model iPads and iPad Pros, while the new Apple Pencil only works with the new iPad Pros. So pick your poison, and you're going to pick your peripheral when you do. Just be aware of that. I suppose you could say look at the Logitech Crayon, but you have to go through Apple educational sales, and I don't know if they're going to sell those devices on a one-on-one basis, considering I think that they're aiming that primarily at the kindergarten and early grade school kind of market segment. So take that for what you will. Just know that I'm disappointed the Pencil doesn't come with the iPad Pro, considering that a lot of what they showed that it could do includes the Apple Pencil, like that before-mentioned outstanding Photoshop suite. Okay, so where does that leave me? Well, I think that the iPad Pro, if it can be used to play video from an external drive and perhaps then even AirPlay them to like an Apple TV, and if it can be connected to multiple peripherals with a USB hub, would be an excellent, excellent portable computer. I think it'd even be an above-average creative professional's workstation. I personally would love to have one to try out and see how it works, to see if I can make this idyllic little thought of mine a reality. However, the price of entry on such a thing is steep. Overall, this is Apple's biggest win of the announcement, and it is the product that I cared least about, but I think has the best potential going forward, so I think it's a real win. Now, lastly, and this last segment is probably going to be a bit long. I've got like a page and a half of notes here about my thoughts about the Mac Mini, so it's going to be long. Let's just say the Mac Mini is not what it used to be. And so for the last part of this video, that leaves me a bit in this quagmire of talking about the Mac Mini and its potential goods and potential bads. So I need to first offer a little explanation about the history of the Mac Mini. Now, remember this part for later because we're going to come back to it. The Mac Mini has historically been the entry point for the Mac computer ecosystem. When Steve Jobs introduced this little machine, he did so with the tagline that was BYODKM. Bring your own display, keyboard, and mouse. You weren't paying for the peripherals, you were paying for the gateway device. Apple has maintained this general ethos for about 10 years. Buy the Mac Mini, and if you love it, you'll invest in an iMac or a MacBook model of some kind later. The Mac Mini will be relegated to a little home theater PC or secondary computer, and you will love your iMac or your MacBook Pro or whatever it is that you end up getting. It's always been the Mac computer for personal usage, not really ever for professional usage, says the guy who is doing this on his 6-year-old Mac Mini. Mac Mini computers have historically been stable, they are usable, and they are good computers for daily tasks. But they have never really been workhorse computers except for the Mac Mini server variants that Apple has sold over the years. So keep that in mind. When I'm talking about this, I'm talking about the Mac Mini from a personal perspective. I love the Mac Mini for what it is. I have an old G4 Mac Mini that it's over there. It still functions. It doesn't do anything, but it still functions because I don't know what to do with it anymore. The wireless is like way out of date. Everything on it is... Anyway, it's there, it exists. You get what I'm saying. They last a long time. They're like super sturdy little computers. And then I have my 2012 Mac Mini, which I just mentioned. It's right down here, actually up under my desk. And it has been easily the best computer that I have ever owned. Ever. And that is, it's a Core i7 machine. I've made some upgrades to it over the years. It is blazing fast. I've got a Toshiba Q-Series Pro solid-state drive. It's a 1 terabyte solid-state drive, and then I put a 1 terabyte data drive in it. So I've got these 2 drives in this one machine. I've upgraded the RAM to 16 gigabytes. And it, aside from gaming, it does everything that I want. I mean, it really is just a fantastic machine. But it may be that this Mac Mini, the 2012 Mac Mini, was the fluke Mac Mini of the series. Because all of the models up through the entry-level 2012 model, and then again with the 2014 model, have all been fairly low-powered machines. I mean, they are at best, aside from the i7 2012 model, a middle-of-the-road computer. The i7 model that I have, I would say, is distinctly above average in the life that this thing has in it and the amount of, I mean, I've tortured this thing. I mean, right now I am recording this with my iPhone and feeding the video of my iPhone into it. I am recording with my Yeti Blue microphone into GarageBand, and I have LibreOffice open so I can look at my notes. It's an incredible machine. You know, I mean, this thing's 6 years old, and it has no problem chugging along with these various inputs at 1080p video, uncompressed audio. So it's a tank of a computer, but that model is the fluke of the series. I'm gravely disappointed in the direction Apple has decided to go for the Mac Mini. As Apple would have it with this new Mac Mini, we're getting some serious drawbacks. Perhaps upgrades? Yeah, alright, yeah, I think upgrades in some respects. But they aren't the upgrades I wanted, nor is it the price. These things go together and can't really be discussed without divorcing them. So I'll be talking pricing and various build-to-order options together for this thing. So let's discuss the CPU. Apple said, Our customers most asked us for a quad-core CPU. Yes, this is undeniably true. I wanted to buy the 2014 Mac Mini, but intentionally never did, simply because it didn't have a quad-core hyper-threaded CPU. And that is the trick, Apple, that I think you missed out on. We wanted a quad-core hyper-threaded CPU. The CPU is the brain behind the whole computer, and for an entry-level machine, a Core i3 is fine, if the price was still at the entry point of $500. But it's not. It's now $800, and I'm sorry, an $800 computer with a mid-range quad-core CPU and storage you cannot upgrade that doesn't even turbo boost on top of that, the i3 series CPUs do not even turbo boost, is not a worthwhile investment whether you plan to upgrade the Mac Mini down the road or not. It's simply, personally, a bad choice. To even get in the Core i7 game, you have to pony up another $300. That'd get me my much desired hyperthreading. It'd give me 6 cores that are hyperthreaded, so it's got 12 threads in it. But damn, that's a steep hill to justify. I mean, the base Core i3 this thing comes with doesn't have hyperthreading, it's not turbo boosted, it's just a serious disappointment on the raw computational ability. It's certainly clocked higher than my Mac Mini is. I've got 4 cores in my current Mac Mini that are at 2.3 gigahertz and can turbo boost up, and it's hyper-threaded to 8 CPU cores. So it's got 8 threads. This Mac Mini has 4 cores, 4 threads, and is stuck at 3.1 gigahertz. It doesn't go up. So take that for what you will. You see why I'm a little bit frustrated with just the sheer CPU ability of this new suggested machine at this price point that they're asking for. In fairness to Apple, I don't think that they're going to abandon support for this model in the short term. Quite the contrary, I expect macOS will be supported for a number of iterations to come. The T2 coprocessor is also present, so this does offer us that very valuable security upgrade, and I told you I'm a big stickler for security. I briefly touched on this small chip before, but I actually looked at the white paper that Apple's released, and the encryption that this thing does for file vault and handling secure processing is excellent. They're tied together, so the storage of the Mac Mini and the T2 processor are both basically have a hardware key, and you cannot decrypt the storage, so your actual, like, whatever you have on there, financial information, personal records, whatever the case may be, can't be decrypted without the actual chips of your storage on that board with that T2 processor. So it's going to be tough to beat, to work around, because the other drawback for me personally is that the storage cannot be divorced from the system. Whatever you get is what you got. So, and the frustrating thing is, just like the MacBook Air, it starts at 128 gigabytes. $800, 128 gigabytes. And the upgrade pricing is, as you would expect, somewhere in the range of outrageous. It's abysmal. The storage situation with the Mac Mini, not the MacBook, but the Mac Mini is abysmal. Despite everything I have said so far, CPU notwithstanding, the biggest issue I have with this machine, just like the MacBook Air, is that the storage is not upgradable and it starts at a paltry 128 gigabytes. It's an absolute and utter non-starter for me. I'm not even going to consider this machine based on that alone. My Mac Mini has got 2 terabytes of storage in it. It's got a 1 terabyte solid state drive, and it also has a 1 terabyte data drive. It's just a regular spinning hard drive that I keep data on, video files and music and things like that. It's where my iTunes library resides and so forth. This thing's only got 128 gigabytes. I would consider the new Mac Mini if the baseline was 512 gigabytes. I could reorganize my video and movie library, my video editing files, and I can offload my photo library to my 4 terabyte external drive. It wouldn't be as elegant as a solution as what I have now with my current Mac Mini, but it could be done, and it would be manageable. So I would definitely be willing to do it. Which brings up the next problem. You cannot upgrade this storage. I know I mentioned it before, but this is really a big stickler for me. You have what you get, which is where the pricing of the storage options isn't even, as if this wasn't bad enough, if I wasn't already not willing to pay this as a personal purchase for myself, this would be the thing that killed it. If I upgrade the baseline Mac Mini in every way except the storage, there is only a $1,000 difference between this entire machine cost and the 2 terabyte solid state option. The 2 terabyte solid state drive is $1,600. $1,600. I can't even begin to pretend that this is acceptable on a personal level. Look, us Apple fans know about the Apple tax, and we're willing to pay it. It doesn't matter to us. It really doesn't. It's fine. We know you don't like the Apple tax, and that's fine too. You don't have to like the Apple tax. But even with my previously stated Apple fanboy credentials, I literally cannot even come close to justifying $1,600 for 2 terabytes of solid-state storage. Corsair sells their newest 2 terabyte PCI Express solid-state drive for $475. Literally 29.6% of the price, and Corsair makes some damn good storage options. I'm happy to pay an Apple tax on storage, or on any upgrade for that matter. I've done it before, and I will probably do it again in the future. It wouldn't surprise me if I did. But I'm just not happy with the storage situation on the Mac Mini, and it really is a deal breaker. But there are some good things about the Mac Mini, so let me go over those real briefly, because unfortunately they are brief. I am happy with the external storage options we've been given with this device. That is count them, 4 Thunderbolt 3 USB-C connections. That's great, and it still has 2 USB-A ports. And the option for 10 gigabit Ethernet is good as well for those enterprise-level IT people who have to consider the need for massive file transfers. Hey, that's me. That's what I do. I work in IT enterprise. So something like 10 gigabyte Ethernet is not glamorous, but it is awesome for us. It's like, man, that would be great to have. I wish every workstation we had at my job had 10 gigabit Ethernet. We don't. But if we had Mac Minis with 10 gigabit Ethernet, that would be stellar. I'd also, again, like to point out the eGPU options here. In either, I think it was in an earlier video that I did this year, I actually got my Sonnet B350 working over my original Thunderbolt spec for my 2012 Mac Mini. And it was a serious visual improvement over what my Mac Mini can do with its internal graphics. With a modern Thunderbolt 3 spec, I imagine this improvement is going to be even greater. You can even use these ports, apparently, to connect the stinking Mac Minis together, and do other cool stuff, and we're going to talk about that. I gotta say, Apple, thank you, God, for at least letting the RAM be upgradable. 8 gigabytes is sufficient. macOS will run very well with 8 gigabytes of RAM. If you're not a creative professional, I think you'll be just fine. Good news is, if you're not, you can upgrade it down the road, because they're on SODIMMs. Hooray. I'm glad we had that talk. So, that's my thoughts on the Mac Mini. Now, I told you to remember the part. What I said earlier, I said remember this point. We're going to go back to it, which was the Mac Mini has historically been the entry point for the Mac computer. Remember me talking about that? We're going to go back to that now. If you watch this section of the keynote for the Mac Mini, the keen-eyed observer will notice some significant differences. These are not being marketed as the entry-level Mac. They are being repositioned as the behind-the-scenes of the business Mac. Consider what we've seen here in this presentation. Music production, interactive art displays, video encoding, movie production, offline code compiling from another Mac, or perhaps even most pointedly, connect them together to make a build farm or a server farm. The message here is clear. This is not a personal Mac for you nor me. Not that it couldn't be, but given where it sits in the pricing scheme of its competitors, which is not much more than what HP and Dell are charging for their micro form factor workstations, the purpose of the Mac Mini has now seriously been altered. as upsetting as this is for me personally, this is now the Mac for businesses. The enterprise space, and I'm sure others will vouch for me when I say this, we already have an overload of mice, keyboards, and monitors. All we need is a tiny box that we can drop on a person's desk and let them go to work. This new Mac Mini will do that very effectively. And enterprise level customers will not bat an eye at paying $750 or $1,600 for a 2 terabyte solid state drive upgrade. HP and Dell's microsystems start at a lower price point than Apple's. That is definitely true. But for the macOS experience, the level of reliability, and the general ease of use, plus the familiarity that many end users will have with their own iOS devices, it is going to be a good option for the enterprise. There's also the fact, many people forget this or didn't know about it at all, that Apple and IBM entered into a strategic partnership back in 2014. That was before I left Apple. Apple may not sell servers, but they are very much interested in returning to the enterprise space. They're simply approaching it in a slightly different manner than HP, Dell, Lenovo, and others. In light of this information, it makes sense for why the Mac Mini has been repositioned the way it has. The storage makes sense because if you're putting this on a server rack somewhere, you don't need a lot of storage on the local machine. You need enough to get a job done for doing whatever compiling it's doing that it has to use, or maybe temporary storage for video files or caching or something like that. But most of that data is going to be held in server racks of hard drives. In that respect, the minimum storage of the Mac Mini makes sense. Everything about the Mac Mini really makes sense. You put a bunch of them, link them together, put them on a rack, leave them, forever and forget about them. And if you're, a cloud host, if you have cloud hosting services at your company or in your organization, you offload all of the heavy lifting to the servers. And if you've got, a dozen of these little computers hooked up, you got a heck of a lot more processing power than any front-end desktop computer or workstation you're using. That's what I got to say about the Mac Mini. Personally, very disappointed. Strategically, probably makes a lot of sense. I think it's clear that Apple wasn't exactly selling buku Mac Minis, since effectively no one in the consumer space has bought them for the last 4 years. I think that they're making the right decision. In closing, I'll say that the iPad Pro is the star of the show. The MacBook Air has a confusing placement in the Apple lineup, but it isn't altogether bad. And I think that the Mac Mini's move is a personal disappointment, but it might be the right direction. So that's the end of it for me, everyone. I know this wasn't a review video. I know it's like it's almost like a podcast. It's just me sitting here talking into a microphone. So hopefully you appreciate that. If there's anything I can do to improve, I don't really plan on doing this much, but I felt like I was just kind of all over the place with my emotions because I'm such a big Apple fan that I had to talk about it, and I wanted to start a little bit of a conversation. And I don't have, I'm not like the Macworld podcast where I've got a crew of people that can sit around and talk about it. I didn't want to just go over the specs. I wanted to actually think about what we might be using these for, and if the purchases are wise purchases for a middle-class individual. I'm middle class, so we'll take what we can get, and hopefully what I have had to say has resonated with you to some degree. So feel free to share your comments. I guess that's it. Take care, everyone. See you next time.